Welcome, everyone. It's great to see everyone here. Our objective here is to give a global perspective to our sector, to corporate banking. We have a great group of panelists here. Hidekazu from Japan. We have a friend Werder from China, right? She will bring a unique perspective that brings lots of curiosity to all of us, which is China. Myself, I'll talk about the substantial market difference that Brazil went through over the last few years, and pass it on to Thomas to share the European experience, and I'll shut my mouth and let's spend a benefit of time. Dr. Hidekazu, please.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for kind introduction. So firstly, I'd like to thank for giving opportunity for presenting our project today. So my name is Hidekazu Nishiki, Associate Professor, University of Tsukuba, Japan. So today, I'd like to talk about the current situation of the cord blood transplantation in Japan. So here's my COI. The Cell Therapeutics is our research collaborator. So here is today's agenda. So yesterday, several discussions regarding the haploidentical transplantation or cord blood transplantation are performed. So, but as you may know, the cord blood transplantation in Japan is a very standard treatment for the patient without HL matched donor. So that's why the situation is a little bit different. So I'd like to demonstrate the result of the haplo and cord transplantation in Japan. And also, yesterday, Asako sees from the Cell Therapeutics gave a talk about the chemical-based ex vivo stem cell expansion protocol. I also would like to demonstrate this unique cultural system. And there are some hurdles for the clinical translation in Japan. So that's why I would like to talk about such situation today. So here is the data regarding the number of the allogeneic transplant in the US by donor type. So as you know, the number of the cord blood transplantation is now gradually decreasing. Instead, the number of the haploidentical transplantation after introducing the post-transplant cyclophosphamide protocol was started. And here's the data of the result of the world survey. The trend is the same. But as you know, the situation in Japan is totally different. Please focus on the green bar. So as you can see, around 30% of allogeneic transplantation in Japan are cord blood transplantation. The number of the PBSCT from the related donor is also increasing, including the haploidentical PBSCT is also expanding now. But you can easily understand the cord blood derived stem cell are very important alternative source for us. So from now, I will explain the benefit and the weak point of the cord blood transplantation and haplo and the comparison result in Japan. So here is the data regarding the survival after allogeneic transplant by donor type in Japan between 1991 to 2022. As you can see, the overall survival of the cord blood transplantation is almost comparable when compared with other donor modality. And one of the benefits of the cord blood transplantation retains a potent graft versus leukemia effect. Here's the Japanese data regarding the patient with non-remission AML. So as you can see, the relapse rate after cord blood transplantation is much lower when compared with the match-related donor transplantation. And another benefit of the cord blood transplantation is better quality of life. So as you can see, the severe chronic GVHD is much lower when compared with other donor modality. And very importantly, almost all cord blood transplantation in Japan are single unit cord blood transplantation. And even now, the result of the cord blood transplantation in Japan is improving. So here's the data regarding the improvement of the RA mortality in the single unit cord blood transplantation in Japan from the 1998 to 2017. As you can see, the overall survival after cord blood transplantation is now gradually improving. And the incidence, the non-relapse mortality is decreasing now. The severe infection or graft failure is decreasing now. And here's the data regarding the comparison between a single unit cord blood transplantation in Japan and Europe. So as you can see, the data of the Japanese cohort is statistically better than the European cohort. However, we still do not know whether which factor is induced such a good data after CBT in Japan. It was reported that TBI-containing regimen or GVHD prophylaxis with non-ATG regimen might be a good factor for the CBT. And genetic homogeneity in Japan is also might be a key for the successful of the cord blood transplantation in Japan. We are island people. And also, the lower body weight enables us to pick up the best identical cord blood unit for the single unit cord blood transplantation. So in any case, according to these background data, cord blood transplantation has become the standard treatment for the patient without HLA matched donor in Japan. So how about HLA haploidentical allogeneic transplantation in Japan? So several protocols for the haplo using the anti-thymoglobulin or steroid-based or T-cell depleted bone marrow or in vivo depletion with a campus or antibody were performed, but the frequent complication due to the excess immune suppression are problematic. But after introducing the post-transplant cyclophosphamide for GVHD prophylaxis, haplo can be performed as haplo stem cell transplantation can be performed more easily and safer, as you know. So here is a summary of the haplo stem cell transplantation with PTCy, post-transplant cyclophosphamide in our institute, performed between 2013 to 2022. So because in Japan, the cord blood transplantation is very important, very standard therapy for us. So that's why discussion about haplo and cord in Japan is a very important hot topic. So in these 2 years, several reports are published from the Japanese group. So our data demonstrates overall survival of the cord blood transplantation and haplo is almost comparable. However, the non-relapse mortality and relapse are totally different. Importantly, the relapse rate after cord blood transplantation is much lower when compared with haplo. So we conclude the cord blood transplantation retains a higher graft versus leukemia effect, and relatively higher non-relapse mortality might be really problematic. So here's the data regarding the annual transplantation number in our institute. So actually, after starting the haploidentical transplantation, the number of the cord blood transplantation, the blue bar, is decreasing. However, after realizing the higher GBR effect on the cord blood transplantation, the number of the cord blood CBT increasing again, which is a little bit different trend when compared with other countries. And most problematic issue of the cord blood transplantation is a delayed engraftment. As you can see, apparently, engraftment after cord blood transplantation is slower than those with other donor source. And engraftment of the donor graft is dependent on the number of the CD34 positive cell. So that's why the key for the success of the CBT is enough number of the stem cell fraction. Here is a result regarding the question about the haplo or cord from the experience of the University of Tsukuba. So actually, there are some disadvantage and advantage in both transplant modality. So what is the next step to overcome the disadvantage of the modality? So as you know, the reduced dose of the cyclophosphamide or adjustments of the T cell dose or stem cell dose, and to overcome the cord blood transplantation, the haplocord or expansion protocol is also ongoing in the world. So I'd like to focus on the project regarding the stem cell expansion from the next slide. So here is a summary of the cord blood stem cell expansion trial in the world. As you know, the omidubicel ex vivo expanded HSC with nicotinamide is approved in the US, and the phase 3 data is very promising. And also, as you know, in the yesterday's talks, the expansion protocol with the UN-171 and SR1 or notrigan is also ongoing now. So how about in Japan? So let me introduce our project using the chemical-based ex vivo stem cell expansion system. The last year, our group published the chemical-based ex vivo stem cell expansion system using the polymer and small compound including a thrombopoietin receptor agonist and the pyrimidine derivative and PR3 kinase actuator. So as you can see, in this culture system, the selective expansion of the CD34 positive cells succeeded. So here's the data regarding the single-cell RNA sequence. As you can see, the blockade of the myelodifferentiation, myocalus differentiation, and erythroid differentiation can be seen. And importantly, the transplantation experiment using the immunodeficient mice shows the expanded HSC transplanted mice shows a higher chimerism when compared to the fresh one. So now we are preparing the fusion-based clinical research with our expanded HSC. For the clinical translation from the basic research of regenerative medicine in Japan, we have to follow the two regulations: Act for Safety of the Regenerative Medicine for clinical research, and Act for Medicine and Medical Device for the clinical trial. And the usage of the cord blood is regulated by the Act for the Stem Cell Transplantation. In Japan, the 6 public cord blood banks preserve the 10,000 HL-typed cord blood unit with established cryopreservation protocol. Since cord blood transplant is routinely performed, and still 1/3 of the allogeneic transplantation is cord blood transplantation. So that's why we can use them only for the unmanipulated cord blood transplantation. And the usage for the commercial purpose is prohibited now. So this means the usage of the cord blood from the Japanese public cord bank for the stem cell expansion is legally very difficult. So let me summarize my presentation. So in Japan, the cord blood is still an important alternative donor source for the allogeneic transplantation. And several cord blood expansion projects for the clinical use are ongoing to overcome the paucity of the stem cell number in the cord blood transplantation. In Japan, the research use of the HLA-typed cord blood unit from the cord blood bank is strictly regulated because they are preserved only for the clinical use. So please understand, so because for us, the cord blood is very important alternative source for the stem cell. So that's why this regulation is reasonable for the current situation. But in the future, there are some problems. So now, we are discussing with the Ministry of the Health and the Public Cord Blood Bank to use the HLA-type donor cord blood unit for the research purpose. So we are now planning the clinical research using the expanded stem cell with our culture system. So I hope in the future I can demonstrate the first in human data in this conference. So here's our research team. Satoshi Yamazaki, he's a principal investigator of our culture protocol. And Shigeru and Naoki, they are the specialist for the clinical transplantation. And I'd like to thank for all our collaborators. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Fran? Yes, Fran is up.
Okay, let's see. They gave me a booster to stand on, but I'm still kind of short. Right, where is that over here? Where's the slideshow thingy? Ah, yeah, sorry.
It's all right.
Okay.
From beginning.
From beginning. Okay, there we go. Okay, so Roberto was right to make a joke like, here is Fran Werder talking about China. It is kind of weird. Where do I come off to talking about China? My expertise in this subject comes from reading a lot of websites of Chinese cord blood banks. I'm just like an expert with Google Translate. I have discovered that if you look at the news or the blog section of the websites from these major cord blood banks in China, if there's a conference, they will have a blog about the conference. And so if I translate that, I then have a summary of what was presented at the conference, or I have status reports on what the bank has done. And so this is how I've been picking up, information that I bring here. But really, it would be ideal if we would have someone from China come here and do this, but you're stuck with me for now. So just to bring everybody up to speed, this was a slide I actually presented last year at Cord Blood Connect. In the process of trolling through all these websites, I had discovered that the World Marrow Donor Association, or WMDA, is severely underreporting the inventory in China and the number of transplants in China. So specifically for the year 2020, I found 6 banks in China that had collectively reported almost 5,000 transplants in 1 year. Actually 5,000 releases almost, 4,907, not necessarily transplants. Whereas the World Marrow Donor Association only had 1,658 for all of Asia. And their definition of Asia includes the Middle East, and it even includes Turkey, which I consider to be a very generous definition of Asia. So, obviously there's a big disparity, and I emphasized this last year. I'm not here to bash the WMDA, but I just want people to be aware there's a huge amount of cord blood usage in China in particular. And it's not being reported in some of the databases that we all rely on. I also found in May of 2023, there was a conference, and I read the news report on that conference, and I found that a very prominent person who frequently shows up in these blogs had made a statement that as of May 2023, there was a cumulative use of 30,000 cord blood therapies in China, cumulative over time. So when I was asked to talk this year, I went to look for the 2024 conference. I thought surely they've had, another meeting this year, and I finally found the report. And in 2024, the statement was made that the cumulative number is now up to 40,000. So, the math is obvious. If it were 30,000 last year and it's 40,000 this year, that would mean that they've done 10,000 in 1 year. Now, even if this number is off by a factor of 2, maybe it's only 5,000, but that's still more than the rest of the world combined. So that was why the joke started being made, how can the rest of the world be more like China in terms of cord blood usage? If you look at the graphs that we're all accustomed to pulling down, from World Marrow Donor Association of usage by year, I drew an arrow which has a height of 10,000. That's how much you would move up the gray line of cord blood transplants if you added 10,000. Now, of course, there's also more peripheral blood transplants and haplocord transplants in China, which are probably not being counted by the WMDA. But, still the point is the cord blood line would be dramatically higher than what we believe. You have to stop being brainwashed that the usage of cord blood is dying. It's only dying in some countries. It's not dying everywhere. So this led me to trying to figure out what are the Chinese doing with cord blood, which became, more than I got some clues by reading case reports in the blogs. Then I had to spend several days doing literature search, looking up articles, trying to find actual published studies. So I picked the indication of thalassemia as an example. Because, and I have another slide which will give you some demographics, but China has a lot of cases of thalassemia. It's prevalent throughout Asia. Thalassemia is a hemoglobinopathy where people have red blood cells that are defective. It's inherited, so it runs in certain ethnic groups, which is why it's very common in Asia. And if you have the severe form of thalassemia, you cannot survive without a stem cell transplant. That being said, if you do get a stem cell transplant, the survival rate is very high. It's like 95%. And so it is really hard to measure improvement from one clinical trial to another because you're already dealing with a high success rate. So the classic paper on this goes back to 2013, Locatelli et al. That was a European overview. And they were already getting survival rates with sibling bone marrow or cord blood 95 to 97%. I managed to find several studies in China just from the past few years that also have survival rates, between 95 and 98%. So, survival alone is not going to be the metric to see a difference. You're going to have to look deeper at long-term, for example, graft versus host. But what was particularly striking is that I discovered that there is a protocol for haplocord transplants, which is very popular in China, and it's being used at multiple institutions. They even have an abbreviated name for it, but I decided not to put that on the slide. Anyhow, here the overview at the bottom of the slide. They basically start out with a traditional haplocord transplant plus post-transplant cyclophosphamide. This is what was invented at Johns Hopkins. It's what most people consider to be the baseline haplotransplant. You always have to have that post-transplant cyclophosphamide to overcome the donor-patient incompatibility. They give the PCY at days 3 and 4, and then on day 6 they give what they call a cord blood transplant, also partially matched. And actually, the dose of cord blood they use is very often less than what we consider to be the required dose. It can be less than 25 million per kilo because they are relying on the combined effect of the haplo and the cord. This protocol is perfect for a country that has lived with a one-child policy for decades. We in the US like to say that almost everybody has a haplocord donor. But in a country like China, that is actually not really true. Most people don't have a sibling. Their parents might be too old to be a haplodonor. Their mother might have antibodies against the baby. So, finding a haplodonor is not a sure thing in China the way it is, let's say in the US. And they refer to this particular protocol as double insurance. So you've got the combination of the haplo and the cord that one or the other will engraft and will pull the patient through. So I personally thought this was fascinating because people in the West are not using this protocol. And I have not found any studies that have two arms of this protocol against another protocol. It's the problem you keep running into in hematology, oncology, that people have something they like to do, but it hasn't been fully tested against the alternatives. A bit more about the demographics of thalassemia and why this is important. So the country that is probably the most impacted in terms of the most numbers of thalassemia patients is India. China and India are neck and neck for population, but India has recently passed China as the world's most populous country. And it's moving ahead and getting bigger because the birth rate is more than double the Chinese birth rate, even with the one-child policy abolished. They have comparable numbers of cord blood banks, but in China, the cord blood banks are almost universally public-private mixed, whereas in India, all the active cord blood banks are private. There's one public bank, but it's not collecting. The number of thalassemia patients in India, these are transfusion-dependent thalassemia major patients. It's drastically higher than China. There's 38,000 in China and 150,000. These are transfusion-dependent patients in India. So there's a huge need in India for stem cell transplants of thalassemia patients, but they are only performing a handful of cord blood therapies a year. So really, if, for example, this one country were to adopt the haplocord protocol that has been developed in China, they would become the world's leader in using cord blood. It is possible to vastly increase cord blood usage, simply by getting the medical community to look at the treatment of common diseases in a different way. So here are some other differences between perspectives in China versus other countries. Another case in point is aplastic anemia. Now, this is not a common indication at all. It has an incidence of 2 per million people. But what's notable, this is a bone marrow failure, which is a result very often of an acquired virus. It is not something you're born with. It is not hereditary. Some countries will allow an autologous transplant to treat aplastic anemia. Once the cord blood has been checked to make sure that it didn't have it at birth. But India will not allow it at all. It's against their regulations. In China, they actually have the attitude that an autologous transplant is better for aplastic anemia because of the faster engraftment. And a particularly famous case, there was a patient in China whose cord blood had been stored for 19 years and received his own cord blood back to treat aplastic anemia. So because he's a famous patient, I thought I would highlight differences in approaches to that particular disease. And looking at things that are more common, let's consider brain injury, particularly brain injury associated with birth and early childhood. I did a bit of a summary just for the past 6 years. How many clinical trials have there been in China alone? These are only China trials, using either cord blood or perinatal MSC to treat brain injury resulting from premature birth, cerebral palsy, autism, and stroke. Incidentally, trials for stroke are very popular in China. During this time period, there are about 24 trials. I'm only showing you the ones with perinatal sources here, but there are also a lot of trials using neuron-type cells. One of the things I came across, which I thought was notable, in March of this year, there was a meeting where the entire meeting was devoted to applications of autologous cord blood. And look at the number of people in that meeting. We couldn't get together a meeting that big in the US and Europe. So I just think this is notable. Dr. Kurtzberg gave a talk to that group. She did it remotely. But this is an example of the kind of ties we need to have to cross-pollinate ways of treating things. So a quote that I pulled out of one of the conference reports, one of the prominent hematology oncology doctors in China was listing the reasons why they really like using cord blood. These are things that people in this room believe. It's like preaching to the choir, a stronger anti-tumor effect, lower recurrence rate, less severity of graft versus host. Things, we believe this, but we are the cord blood community. I find it interesting that in China you get the hem-onc community embracing the fact that cord blood is really a desirable graft source. This is something that our national cord blood program that was recently formed is working on bringing that message to the US hem-onc community. So in summary, how can other countries achieve cord blood utilization that is more like China? Well, certainly any countries that have large numbers of patients with thalassemia, for example, India, but also Thailand, other Asian countries, there really should be more transplant treatment of thalassemia. It would be great if we had a 2-arm clinical trial of that haplocord protocol, which is very popular in China, and trialed that against either a haplo or a cord, and more clinical trials of treating brain injuries with perinatal cells. So these are all ways that we can try to get a higher cord blood utilization, because this is what the Chinese are doing, and they have a very high utilization. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. Well, my presentation, I hope it doesn't turn off too much. Fran used a very powerful term as to cord blood is dying in some markets. It's not dying in Brazil, but I thought it would be valuable to share the Brazilian experience, which is a substantial change as opposed to 10, 15 years ago. First, my disclosures, I'm a shareholder of a company that's a parent company of 2 cord and tissue banks in Brazil. So I do have conflict of interest, and what I will say is verifiable data from public sources, and with the sole intent of sharing information and enriching the debate. Well, first to share with you guys a snapshot of my country. It's a continental size country. It's larger than continental US. And even though we don't have the birth rates that you see in China and India, we have roughly 2.5 million people born in Brazil, even though the birth rate is dropping. And it could be attributable to economic crisis, as having a baby is such a relevant financial commitment on the family side. And despite this drop, if you look at the blue column, which is the detailed number of births, in the case of Brazil, there's this huge logistic challenge to get to the cities, because cities aren't served properly by commercial flights. So you'd almost cut in half whatever you can serve to one of roughly 1 million, or less than half. And then you have the income challenge, which is the purchasing power, which is down to the yellow piece. And then you have the amount of collections made on these births. So penetration is ridiculous. It's off the decimal point. It's really dismal. But now is kind of the tough news. This is the ethnic breakup of the Brazilian population. As of 2022, whites are not the majority of the ethnic buildup of Brazil. Mixed ethnicity of blacks and Indians, blacks and Oriental, all kinds of different variations account for the most important portion, which would suggest, as everything we've seen up to now, that this is a portion of the population that will have a hard time to find a donor. And it just is a compelling argument towards well-functioning public banks and of private banking. And then a very provocative analysis that we like to look at is first looking at the private banking side, and then I'll give a quick snapshot on the public banking side in Brazil. What has happened in Brazil over the last 10, 20 years that private banking has dropped so much? Is it core incompetence of our sector? Is it that, as sometimes we spoke previously, that cord blood stopped, cord blood ended, or things of that nature? And what we realized is that the decision to bank cord blood is correlated to economic confidence. And to measure economic confidence, I tried to establish a correlation. And I invented this correlation, but it's so obvious, as you will see it, of two equally discretionary decisions for pregnant families: changing cars for a larger car and collecting cord blood. The baby will be conceived either way, right? So I may not change my car, I may not collect cord blood. So this is a 20-year series of new car sales in Brazil. And this is cord blood collection of our two brands in Brazil. And can someone help me not view a correlation between this long-term trend? So there is a gigantic correlation between economic confidence and cord blood banking, and we should not be surprised when this happens. So that's that mostly explains what has happened. And then if we look at the cord blood banking as my background of business, in a certain sense, I consider myself a marketing guy. I love what I do. I love to impact people's lives. But I look at the sector many times as a marketer, and I could not run away from a market share approach towards production of private banks. And this is what it looked like. My goodness, it dropped in like a third from 16,000 units that at a certain point were collected a year to a third or less than that 10 years later. And that was the peak of the crisis. We're at the bottom and it's starting to turn around. And this is the cumulative stock of inventory of privately stored banks. If you look at the market share information, it looks like a bloodbath, right? It's like horrific. It dropped a third since its peak, and it looks like every one shrank. And then this is the point I'd like to drive home with everyone, is did it shrink equally for everyone? And this is where banks differ completely, and the results now, retrospectively, 10 years later, will differ. And if you look at the same exact slide on a percentage piece, on the market share basis, what you'll notice is I tried to group the banks into strategies and way they position themselves. And we have positioned ourselves first exploring consolidation to be more efficient in what we do and transplant more patients, the most patients we can. So it's a very professional approach toward our sector, and that reaped to us a 10 percentage point market share gain. And then I'll use here just for a second a euphemism, trying to be nice to people, and call them B-brand and promo-driven companies. These aren't companies that actually are very truthful to the consumers and that horse around with shady information. And unfortunately, if you look at the graph, the data, we need to be slaves to the reality of what the information tells us. It's an even higher market share gain. And then we have a group of players that I'd call them regional players, small players, focused, niched in their own markets that have an okay quality. They have gained market share. They haven't actually lost market share. But what's really, really compelling is this last piece. I'd call it the fatigue/ethics group. People that either or got tired because the sector is plain difficult. It's very, very challenging. Or people that died for their own mistakes, were sub-ethics, substandard from an institutional standpoint, and paid dearly for that. And this is, it's just visual in this graphic. It's like it blew away 30% of the market share of the whole market. And the obvious conclusion is that it's worthwhile to play the ethics game, which is the conclusion. I mean, the good news is that integrity, market consolidation, and evidence-based marketing works. It renders results. Smart, regionally focused businesses can also be resilient. The bad news is that in markets where regulation is poorly enforced, we heard Peter Marks say that they have short hands, that they don't have huge teams. Imagine Brazil. I mean, enforcement is very scarce, it's very limited. So what I'll say is kind of harsh. It tends to prove worthwhile to be what I call, with this euphemism, be brand and promo driven, because you don't get caught. So you eventually long-term survive doing things that your mom wouldn't be proud of you doing, you know? And the sad but inevitable truth is that low ethics and substandard quality banks, I mean, the reality eventually catches up to them. And having questionable practices, I mean, it caught up to these banks, and many banks either have stopped collecting, either have shut down. We have analyzed eventually banks that have not passed our threshold test, either of technical quality, either of institutional and financial stability threshold. But it's sad but inevitable. And the truth is, family banking is not an easy business. So Brazil is just here to prove that a third of the players a third of the market that used to belong to a certain group of families, of companies, simply aren't there anymore. And fortunately, the units are still on the banks, in the tanks. And we're hopeful that long-term people at least keep them there. Now, a quick snapshot of the public piece. This is a map straight from the former Brazilian Cord network that you used to call Brazil Cord. So they have, in Brazil, 15 public banks with 17 to 18,000 stored banks, as opposed to the 17 family banks with roughly 170,000 units. They're spread throughout the country. And the performance of the public banks across the years, basically the banks shut down. They're not collecting anymore. The Ministry of Health has decided that we'll stop collecting. And I'll mention the reasons further down the line. This was the impact for society. I mean, very, very low, 68 transplants. And the good news of Brazil is that Brazil is the third bone marrow registry of the world, with something we call in Brazil Redome, the registry of bone marrow donors. And it's a relevant number. But from a public cord blood standpoint, really it's a pity. It's really a pity. The next steps, and honestly, I had a hard time finding someone responsible for the bank that could answer or give me updated information. As of today, there are 19 or 20 eventually bioarchives, which are super expensive equipments, spread throughout the country. I know because we operate 2 bioarchives in Brazil. They have roughly 3,600, 3,700 capacity. You're talking about 70, 80,000 unit capacity of cord blood units. And I showed you guys, we have 17,000. I mean, the amount of inefficiency is brutal. There's a lot of money that was spent here that was not used properly. The next step of the bank is to consolidate everything in one institution, and likely low cell counts may be discarded. That was an information given to me by the former director of the Brazil Cord network. And the position of the Ministry of Health is that now we will focus, and we have been focusing and assisting and helping and promoting haplo and CAR T cell therapy. And then, and the question is, wait, I put that really? I remembered, I was reminded of Fran in our conversation. Is CAR T therapy really, you're changing public banking for CAR T cell for economic reasons? I mean, this is super expensive. No, we're doing a Brazilian version of it. There's a Brazilian protocol being developed that's less expensive and everything, but it drives the point of why this either-or mentality. And the lessons learned, unfortunately, are that once more, public banking has proven to be a very expensive public health policy option. Governance and accountability and state entity have proven also to be a challenge in Latin America. It's what is referred to in America as other people's money, right? Owners take care of what's theirs with substantial caution, and unfortunately, governance and accountability are a challenge. And as a consequence, efficiency and efficacy are also suffer a lot. And the sad story is that again, the Brazilian society pays a high price for such a turbulent dialogue between public and private. I asked this former government agent, have you guys considered subcontracting with private companies that we store your public banks? And no, public is public, private and private. Let's keep it that way, please. So that's the kind of thing that, okay, fine, but at the end of the day, society pays for it, right? As closing remarks, I would say that, again, integrity, good management, legitimate interest in helping patients, sooner or later, things that pay off. They may take long, they may be the no shortcut path to the future of your organization. And there's this term in international policy called ethnic cleansing. I would say this is an ethic cleansing that happened. It's an ethical cleansing that occurred in our sector, should pave the way for a more rational collaboration. And when I say among equals, people that have equal values, equal principles, and believe in similar things. And again, overcoming old-fashioned stereotypes that the public is good and private is bad. We deal a lot with that in Brazil to date. And the other message is substandard quality eventually surfaces. It's just really a matter of time. And I just second, I think it was Colleen's point and a few other colleagues, and it's our challenge here, evidence, and a little bit more of evidence. We need a lot of that. No, cord blood didn't end. It didn't lose its inherent biologic properties. God didn't make a decision that cord blood doesn't work anymore. We just need to get our acts together, honestly, as a group of professionals and start to communicate properly and impact society with transplants, with transplant registries, with promoting more clinical trials, the stuff all of us have been talking about. And then one last provocative thought here is, again, let's prioritize patients, please. And the view of the patients will always be match them related donors and mismatch them related donors and cord blood and haplo and CAR T, and please give me everything. Where's the or? The or is the private agenda, is because my research is better than your research, and that serves no one's interest, honestly. And that's a matter of prioritizing patients and not prioritizing our own agendas, okay? Thank you for your time. I'll pass on to Tomas, who will bring the European approach here.
Now I realize that I have a toughest task, not just because I'm the last one between you and lunch, but also my colleagues were speaking, each of them about one country, mostly. Fran mentioned about China and India. I have to tell you about Europe, which is close to 50 countries. So that's complicated. Okay. Here are my disclosures. I'm a board member and shareholder of Vita 34 and Famicort Group, which is the largest European corporate bank running also public and hybrid activity. Let me start with the picture of how many banks are in Europe. So we have more than 50 public corporate banks. Some of them are in a passive mode, so similarly to what was shown before, they just keep the old samples, and we have something like 60 plus family banks all over Europe, and part of them are just offices, so those are just like a commercial companies which are subcontracting the processing and storage to the accredited bank. And also here we had the changes over the years. There was a consolidation of the market. Some companies stopped their activity. Some did it in the controlled way. Some others not. But it happens. And also, what is because of we have that many markets in Europe, some of the markets are just operating in a single country, with a single lab, single country. On the right-hand side, you can see the map of Famicort. We are in most of the European countries, but we also have bridgeheads outside of Europe in Emirates and Hong Kong. So what is important for always for a banking, we have some factors which help the banking industry to grow, and we have some trends which are hampering that growth. So definitely new data for a corporate are coming. Definitely there is more proofs. The corporate becomes more accepted. And on the negative side, we have also a couple of trends which I will describe in my talk. Let me start in a positive way. So Europe was the first. So the first transplantation took place in Europe for an American boy. So we know that picture has been taken in that room a couple of years earlier, and Europe was a kind of a pioneer. But this is not the picture any longer. Europe is much more conservative, and as we see on that meeting, a lot of progress is done outside of Europe, either in Asia or United States. On the positive side, we have new data from which were presented here also last year, that cord blood can be useful after many years of storage, and that works both for a family banked units and also the units which were banked publicly. So, a couple of years ago there were many skeptics around that saying no, the medicine, the science, the technology is progressing that fast that we cannot use the 20th century originated material. On the other hand, we have a data that cord blood in many areas can be better than other sources of cells. I will not go deeper into that, but the experience from Japan was a good example of that. But despite those positive news, if we look on Europe, The data from WMDA shows clearly that Europe, which is the red line, the blue line, is going down, not that fast as US, but definitely it's going down. And if you look on that graph, which is here, you can see the ratios per 10 million of population. So in Europe we have 1, comparing to North America, which is still 4 times. In Europe we have 4, and in North America we have 17. So this is 4 times more. And the left-hand side, the pictures on the left-hand side are showing mostly the public bank activity, but if you look also on the family banked units, we also have a big differences in use of those banks in releasing of those units for transplantations. In counting all European banks, we have more or less the frequency of 1 per 10,000, which is being released for a transplantation. We as a FamiCord, we have a little bit better odds of using the bank cord blood, but still it's 3-4 times less than the large US banks. But if you look on Korea, we are 10 times behind. So that's showing that this is not only about the banking, but this is also about using that in therapy. And that goes together. The trends are also not favorable. If you see in Europe, the green line, over the last year there is a stabilization, but if you can see here there is a little positive news, because the other sources also dropped down a little in the absolute numbers, so percentage-wise, we had some years when cord blood use increased. If we look on the sum of European countries, you can see how different they are. If in Germany, the cord blood currently, this is the last. This is the 5 years data, as you can see, from 2017 to 2021. So this is not the most recent, but you can see how that in Netherlands, they definitely do know something different than in Sweden, for example, or in Germany. So there are some trends which are country-specific as well. When we look into EBMT data, something like 10 to 15% of the samples, of the transplants, are done with the family banked units. So family banks are contributing to the transplantation starts. And some of them are, some of the units are also used in an autologous setting. Moving to the negative trends, demography is going down very much. When we see the situation here that now we have the deliveries of the mothers which were born here. So there will be the pool of the women which can deliver the babies will not grow. So we cannot expect that the trend will change. It will continue like that. And also, I realized after Frances' talk that actually she mentioned China, one-child policy. In Europe, the same is happening, and this is not forced by regulations, yes? This is the lifestyle. So, we may see that the haplo will go down as well because there will be no donors. So, so the demography is changing. The question is, it doesn't matter, yes? Still, 1 to 2% of the cord blood is collected, so out of 4 million deliveries, we still have a space to grow. If we look on the ethnic diversity, and you know, all that picture from the US, illustrating the US population. Europe is not that much diverse, but it's changing definitely. And here you can see how, this is the snapshot from 2021, showing how many babies were born in a given country out of the foreign-born mothers. So it shows the migration. Of course, it can be a different migration. You know, the migration between Luxembourg is a super small country. I mean, it's like, I don't know, 10% of Miami. So probably the migration from to Luxembourg is not that important, but in some markets that migrations are happening. So that ethnicities will be mixing, and you know, we also have, you know, if you can imagine a couple where one of them is coming from the North Finland, and the second one is coming from Portugal, that ethnicity is not the same. I mean, they are both Europeans, but that can be complicated. Now let me jump to the public and private discussion. As we have it in Europe, I think quite strong discussions over the last 20 years. And the arguments were all the same: altruism, solidarity versus for-profit activity. Of course, the probability of using the sample in the public cord blood bank is higher than in the private banks. But also the audience, the potential patients are different, yes? There are limitations of use, but also here and in both places. Of course, family banking is related with the cost, but public banking is not a reimbursed family banking. It's a different purpose. So those women are confronted with those discussions, and I can show you the real life paradox. And that was from my family in one of the countries in Europe, beautiful Ireland, when a woman wanted to collect the cord blood for a bank, and she was given an answer, yeah, but no, we don't work with private banks any longer. Okay, let's donate it. That's super, that's a fantastic gesture, it's so altruistic. So how to do it? Well, you have to travel 200 miles to Dublin and then donate it there. So what is the effect? The cord blood goes to trash bin. So I think that there is a very there is more such situation, unfortunately, which I will show you later. Families banks had over the years many issues. In some countries, the banks operate only as autologous banks, so they cannot release for allogenic purposes. Quality control has been an issue. We know about the marketing, over-promising, and I mentioned already that some of them even uncontrolled, bankrupted in an uncontrolled way. So that could be an issue for samples. But also public banks had their issues, and the public funds are similar to what Roberto showed. There have been issues in funding. Some banks stopped activity, and then also I just wanted to mention the effectiveness. Yes, we were shown that. In US, we have 19 banks, so more or less we have a 1.7 bank per 10 million, yes? We have a very effective Japanese banks, which example we saw. Also UK is doing very well. Anthony Nolan, I think colleagues are here, and they will be sharing they share their experience, how they are supporting the transplantations. So that definitely works, but there are also some examples like Italy, where there is a lot of them. Of course, they are grouped in a network, but I think that it's a question mark if a small network of banks can be as effective as a stronger bank like in the UK. But does it make to fight, to compete? We have in Europe several limitations on family banking. So in France and Belgium, it's impossible to collect. In Italy, you can collect, but this is just the parents' decision, and they have to send it abroad for a processing. In Spain, you can operate a family bank, but you cannot store it locally because that sample will go to the registries immediately, which many of the parents do not want. But if we look, this is a quite old publication, but showing very nicely the situation which was 15 years ago. In France, where public banks had a kind of a monopoly, and Spain at that time was the most developed market for family banking. There were 16 family banks operating, and also public banks. And if you can compare the effectiveness of the system, that French system was not that effective comparing to the population. And Spanish one was quite doing well. So maybe it's not a proof, but it's showing that it should not be a competition. Yes, we have enough place for both types of banking. And actually, this is quite nicely, how to say it? It was quite nicely defined by European Union Parliament more than 10 years ago, and they highlighted that, first of all, cord blood is useful. Everyone has to be informed. Every person's right should be protected to have a free choice. And also, some old opinions should be updated and amended. So that drives me always to the conclusion that we should not have a public versus private discussion. It should be public and private. And this is like with the transportation, yes? We all know that the public transportation is most effective for the society. But if you like to have a car, that's fine. I'm getting out of time, I think, so let me go faster with the concluding remarks. So the common issues for both type of banks is the delayed cord clamping, which is affecting the quality of the cord blood collected. What will also affect us are the new regulations, which will be more unified. They will come in force in 2000. They were just published, and they will come into force in 2027. So it will be a regulation, which is a higher act in European Union legislative than just directives. And I like Joanne Kurzbeck quote that cord blood is, not half empty but half full. I believe that Europe is still on the half empty side, but hopefully we will do some efforts to move it a little bit to the half full side. But this is complicated as saying thank you in the European languages. In the US, it's simple. You can say gracias and thank you. And Europe, it's complicated. So thank you very much. And
Well, we have roughly 17 minutes to be more precise for debates and opening up for questions. So I'll kick off with one or two questions here for the crowd. And Hidekatsu and Fran, could you elaborate on the haplocord protocol? How is it done in Japan? What have you discovered is done in China? Because it's something that's certainly not done, at least in Brazil. And it seems to make sense in my mind.
So because in Japan, because right now in Japan, the haplocode protocol is not so familiar. So please comment it. So because cord blood transplantation, a single cord blood transplantation is enough for the Japanese patients.
Well, I had put on my slide that the protocol they're using in China, it starts with a traditional haplo plus post-transplant cyclophosphamide, traditional, and then at day 6, they give a cord blood dose. Now, I don't know, exactly what the haplocord protocol is in Japan, but it's just, no country, to my knowledge, has run a 2-arm study.
Yeah, and it's not done that way in the U.S., just to be clear. The haplocord in the U.S. is, at least unless someone else knows otherwise, the ones that I'm familiar with, and Juliet ran a whole study, which she called the Manhattan, right? She did a double cord plus haplo. But in those situations, as far as I know, the haplo is really meant to be a bridging graft because they CD34 select. So it's very different. I was surprised, Fran, what you said, that they come in with a cord blood transplant after the post-transplant PSI. I mean, that was fascinating to me, and I was kind of like, why? Right? I'm like, I don't really understand why one would do that approach, but traditionally in the U.S., the stem cell graft is on day 0, whether it be a haplo or a cord or a haplocord or a double cord plus a haplo. But in that case, they do CD34, select the haplo. And that's meant to cover, kind of like what we were trying to do with expansion, to cover the period of post-conditioning pancytopenia, right? Because the cord blood graft used to, and I emphasize that, take longer to engraft. We no longer really have a huge problem with time to engraftment with cord blood transplant, at least in my vantage point.
Thank you, Colleen. And Gare?
Yeah, thank you. Great session. I have a comment and then a question. I guess my comment is really in defence of WMDA and their reporting. It's not that they're not reporting what's going on, but they can only report what they receive, the data they receive, and they send their surveys out to everyone, and they actually make a comment about that in the Global Trends report every year, that they can only report what they receive in. So it's not that they're not doing their job, they just need more people to report to them. And then my question is to Dr. Nishiki, sorry. That was really interesting. And I'm just wondering, do the cord blood units in the public banks, do they have consent from the donors for research or clinical trials? So if the regulations are able to be changed, will you be able to use those units, assuming the donor has given consent for research, or is it more planned that if the regulations can change, then prospectively you will look at getting consent from cord blood donors for other uses or research?
So thank you for your question. So yeah, actually the situation in Japan is a little bit unique. So because actually the usage of the cord blood unit from the public cord bank is relatively high compared with other countries. So yeah, so yesterday the Asako from the Cell Therapeutics talks about the incidence regarding the illegal usage of the cord blood in Japan. This incidence is occurred around 10 years ago, but so according to this background, so now the regulation of the research use of the cord blood unit is very strictly. So that's why actually for the clinical research using the cord blood unit is very difficult now. So that's why some company is try to use cord blood unit from the other country. And that's very problematic. So yeah, actually, so now under the current regulation, the HLA-typed cord blood unit from the public cord blood bank is only used for the clinical cord blood transplantation. So that's why actually we are now, there are some problem in the future, but yeah, right now, under the current situation, it's not so easy to
so
do
at the time of public banking, can the cord blood donors consent to research, or is it just consent for banking?
You mean the consent from the
From the
collections?
donor,
Yeah.
yeah.
So actually, right now, in the current regulation, there are some consents regarding the research use. But actually, how can I say? Yeah, in the real, it's not so easy to use the clinical research. Yeah.
Yes.
Because
yeah.
we are now focusing only for the research for the real clinical cord blood transplantation in the clinic.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
My question goes into the same direction because we attended the IPSC workshop in Vancouver this year, and there was a very impressive program out on the iPSC lines generated from cord blood in Japan by Yamanaka. So how have the people developed this program without having a consent from your unrelated bank? Because they selected based on HLA.
So actually, the situation for the research for the iPS cell is a little bit unique in Japan.
Okay.
So because actually in Japan, the government power is very strong for the usage of the iPS cell. So that's why actually the consents for the establishment of the iPS is already done in the in these years. So that's why. But actually. The real usage of the establishment of the iPS cell is also very limited. So because actually the small amount of the cord blood unit is enough for the establishment of the iPS cell bank. So that's why. Yeah.
But it was very impressive.
Yeah.
I would like to say what kind of studies they could establish in Japan and how well organized it was. So.
Hi. So, from my perspective, running 22 World Stem Cell Summits, every so often I pop into the Cord Blood Connect. And this was very depressing to me, in a way, because it seems like there's this giant unmet need, I observe, a huge medical unmet need. But it's not a simple message how this field addresses the unmet need. I'm concerned about the fact that stem cells and now cord blood fall into a category where it's become a commodity rather than the science and medicine behind it. And everyone and their cousin has some sort of, if not a bank, at least a clinic doing something called stem cells. So the public views this as something that should be widely available. With that concern, I'm wondering if part of the message, probably in the US, and I can't, but maybe in the rest of the world, is the field needs to be validated by the giant healthcare providers, at least in the United States, that are providing or tied into major medical institutions to validate what's being done. And of course, the final observation, if you'll allow me, is that the loss of confidence is because of the bankruptcies, the few bad outcomes that have spoiled the field without a counter movement or coalition that is hammering hard enough the positivity of it. So, we root for this as patient advocates that this come through, and I just wanted to share those observations and how interesting this whole thing was. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you, Bernie. And I would add, we have had other discussions about a few other topics I would add in addition to what you have said, which is we as a group should kind of stop preaching to the crowd and bring more pediatricians and endocrinologists and call all kinds of different multidisciplinary specialties to share with us, to profit from the descent, not only navigate these smooth waters of the consensus, right? I think that's the first thing. The second thing is in doing that, be as fact-based as we can to avoid making exception be faced as rule. And the third thing I would say is that we have to be humble to the fact that even in science and medicine, there's fashion. Things go in and out of favor. So like CAR-T is the sexy girl on the block now. And then what's the next one? And then cord blood is over? So it's just that these things are additive, not mutually exclusive. And you can only drive that point home with professional dialogue and having equals talk to each other. Ethical, talking to ethical. Professional, talking to professional. And thanks for your input, Bernie. Absolutely.
I want to add from the point of view of global trends, speaking of sexy things, like right now in the US, gene therapy is like really, really sexy. And there are companies that have developed gene therapy for thalassemia, and they have gotten it FDA approved, and it's considered to be cost effective, even though it costs $2 million per patient. And in the United States, that is cost effective because in this entire country, we only have 1,500 people with thalassemia who are transfusion dependent. That's why it's cost effective to cure them at $2 million a person. But in the developing world, that's obviously not going to fly because the costs can't be borne, and also the technology for gene therapy may not be available. So, there's a need for more cord blood transplants in, partially developed and developing nations, what the UN calls low and middle income countries. So there's a big unmet need for people who need transplants to cure diseases like hemoglobinopathies. I mean, a lot more transplants could be performed if the medical experts were operating in those countries. And we have another comment.
Yes, the question is more for Drs. Baran and Dr. Werther. We have reliable data on the clinical use of the cord blood units, the releases annually. Where can we get such similarly reliable data on the research use, considering that it's not only the sum of clinical trials registered, but also in Europe, for example, you have the hospital exemption use and the compassionate care. Thank you.
Well, if you can wait for my newsletter that's coming out next week, I'll have an update on clinical trials with cord blood and birth tissues through 2023. So there'll be some updated data, but it's very difficult to track how many therapies are performed in expanded access programs unless they release, some numbers. You have to get somebody to release numbers.
Yeah, from our end, we are just pushing the clinicians to publish whatever they do, but it's not that easy.
Well, and preclinical too, right? Preclinical papers will be helpful as well, right? On the research use. Does anyone, I don't want to, I really have more of a plea or I'm not really sure what I want to back up Joanne this morning. We've had amazing sessions here throughout the day and a half, and we're all talking about all the amazing things and the amazing potential that cord blood has. We have had a great session this morning with Peter Marks and Jeremy Sugarman, and how can we elevate all of the things that are being done. But I think the reality is if we don't work together, we're not going to get there. And I think, so really this is a plea. Again, I know I've said this every single time I get up on the podium. We need people to become members. I don't know if it's a CBA that's going to do this, but Joanne made a call for action this morning that we should be thinking about guidelines. We're not an accrediting, standardizing body, but guidelines for family banks. So I guess I'm asking everyone in the room who, between the public and the private banks and the researchers, what do we need to do to take all of the data that you guys are showing and come together to help each other out? And whether that's under the umbrella of the CBA or it's not, if it is the CBA, we need the stakeholders to come forward and be a part of the CBA. We cannot do this on our own. And this conference is incredibly important for this. Bernie, I'm so glad you're here. You don't come every year, and just like you're saying, this is depressing, like, you know, the whole, you do the, so I think we need to come together. So this is a plea and a call to action for everyone to either join the CBA or to let us know how we can make this easier, how we can come to agreement, how we can help the family banks. I think a lot of the things happening in the allogeneic space can translate to the autologous space, but we need everyone to join.
If I can respond to that, Colleen, I agree. I second your opinion totally. And we will get nowhere if we don't address effectively how to scale this and the proper business of science. You and I have seen so many good people from the business standpoint come and go. This is a difficult business. You really need to believe in this, be moved by a sense of mission. But how do we shy away these people? In and of itself, it's difficult. Okay, but the lack of dialogue, the lack of getting together in CBA. So the answer is strengthening the CBA, strengthening the dialogue, listening, welcoming the dissent, welcoming and addressing upfront people who don't agree with us. And I'm interested in why they don't agree with us, and tackle these things. And many times it's a lack of information, qualified information flowing back and forth. So just to add let's say the business side of it. Thank you. We have 1 minute left between us and food. Anyone else? Thank you very, very much. Thank you for the panelists.